Khan Academy began as a cousin teaching a cousin mathematics, and today it is an online global phenomena. Elizabeth Slavitt works with schools to create individualized, collaborative, and joyful classroom environments in which Khan Academy software and visionary teachers help students master concepts and at their own pace. Elizabeth, while considering law school, became fascinated by what they were doing and about their dream of educating the world for free. A dream very similar to her own. Elizabeth decided that she too wanted to be part of this new revolutionary idea. She wanted to be able to create something that didn't exist already. Please welcome Miss Elizabeth Slavitt to the stage.
Good evening. Thanks so much for having me here tonight. So earlier this week, I was reading an article in the New York Times by Nicholas Kristof about the Flynn effect, which essentially says that we're getting smarter. Human IQ is increasing on average. And it's not that we're born smarter than we were a few decades ago, it's that we're actually doing a better job of harnessing human intelligence. And there's a lot of possible explanations for this. Some of them are environmental, but one of the main causes of this is that more people are getting access to education. In fact, in countries where women have more opportunities and more access to education, their IQs are now comparable to men's. They're being able to live up to their potential. And this is really good news. This is really exciting for so many reasons. And one of the reasons is that if we kind of think about all of the potential talent available in the world, all of the potential intelligence that we could be tapping into, we know that we're not taking advantage of all of it. And we know that this is disproportionately true in certain regions of the world and among certain populations. And this is not just a tragedy for individuals who aren't able to live up to their full potential. It's also a tragedy for society. We have plenty of problems. We have scientific discoveries that need to be made. We have political, economic, social problems. We need all the talent we can get to solve these problems. And if we're not fully taking advantage of all of the potential talent out there, we're doing all of ourselves a disservice. But the good news is that if there's one force that can really identify and cultivate talent, it's education. And so it stands to reason that what we should really dedicate as much energy as we can to is broadening access to education. And when we talk about broadening access to education, I think we often talk about the who of education. How many people have access to education in the world, and how can we increase that number? And that's definitely a really huge part of this, but I think there's two other factors that are also critical. The what of education, what do these people have access to? And the when of education, when are they able to access it? And the good news is that I think we're living in a time now where we can dramatically increase access to education along all three of these dimensions by reimagining the how of education. You know, when we think about the who of education, we often think that to really get a world-class education, you need to attend a rarefied educational institution. But what if we lived in a world in which even these children in a village in Afghanistan could access high-quality education, just like those who are privileged enough to attend a rarefied institution? We know that to really cultivate a talent, to really become the best you can be, you need a strong educational foundation. Otherwise, things will all fall apart. But even in the best case scenarios, even in societies where we have good quality education, so often we organize our system around age-based cohorts, as if everyone born within 6 months of you should be learning the exact same thing on the exact same date. And part of this is just a practical necessity. A lot of people know it doesn't ideally function this way, but that's the way it has to be, or so we think. But what if, instead of learning the same thing as someone who happens to be the same age as you, you were able to learn exactly what you needed when you were ready for it? You were able to learn the things that you were ready for whenever you needed them. What if that were the case? You know, even in great educational systems, We often think of education as something that you do formally, and that you complete at 18 or 22 or whatever with a graduation, something that we celebrate, as we rightly should, when you graduate from high school or college. The problem is, what if you don't get access to education as a child? Or what if the education that you get, the skills you develop, the talents you cultivate, are no longer valued by the market in the next decade or 2 or 3 decades later? What if your job can be done by a machine? What if your job is sent to a different country? If we think of education as something that's done formally and then we cross into a threshold of working, we don't have the flexibility we need to retool. But what if education were something that you could access at any point in your life? That no matter how old you were, you had access to great education. Well, the good news is I think we can actually begin to answer some of these questions and significantly broaden access to education if we look to online education. Now, I want to be clear that online education is definitely not a panacea for all of the world's problems or even all of the world's educational problems. But I do think that we're living in a time now where it can begin to make a significant impact. Like Khan Academy, there are so many other institutions and organizations that are working hard to provide free world-class education to the world. And what's really exciting is that even as there's this proliferation of so many offerings online, simultaneously we're seeing internet access become much more ubiquitous. We're seeing the cost of technology really, really decrease. And there's still a long way to go on those fronts, and efforts to create light versions of these sites or to provide offline solutions are still really critical and will help us get there faster. But we're living at a time now where online education can really begin to make inroads to providing more education to more people, to increasing access. I want to share a few examples of things that are already happening to help illustrate what I mean. And these examples come from Khan Academy, but there are so many other organizations that are doing similar and important work, and it's really going to take the proverbial village to make a difference. This is Zaya. She is an orphan in Mongolia. She was fortunate because an organization called Teach a Class brought some free online educational resources into her orphanage. And once those resources were there, Zaya began to study diligently. She began to learn in ways that she was not able to before because she just didn't have access to great educational resources. And it turned out that Zaya is actually quite a brilliant girl. She has a lot of potential. And she's been able to study math and science and develop all kinds of skills. And her life will undoubtedly be much richer and much better because she's gotten access to education. We all know how many doors education can open. But it's not just Zaya. She's now begun to translate content into Mongolian, which will benefit so many other people around her. And I'm sure that the skills and knowledge she has will help her go on to do great things that will benefit society more broadly. Everyone wins when there's more access to education. You know, Zaya is one example of what can happen when more people get access to education through online resources. But you know, she's just one of many who could benefit. UNESCO estimates that 61 million school-aged children, 61 million, are not in school. Now, of course, increasing access to online education will not help all 61 million of those children get an education. The reasons they're not in school are varied and complex, and there's no way that online education can solve all those problems. But it can make a difference. It can begin to make inroads for people like Zaya, and certainly there are children who, once they get access to education they otherwise would not have found, will be able to go on and do great things to their own benefit and to the benefit of society, thanks to the fact that education does not have to be restricted to rarefied institutions any longer. They, like Zaya, will see their lives becoming much better as a result. Alex is another example of the power of online education. Alex came into 6th grade way below grade level. He was lacking really any of the fundamentals in math that his peers had. And in his classroom, they started using online educational resources, in math in particular, in the area where Alex really was far behind. And as a result of getting exposed to those resources, Alex really was able to get up to speed and catch up with his classmates. He was able to study as much as he needed to. He was able to watch videos over and over again without the embarrassment of having to let his peers know he was behind. He was able to practice concepts repeatedly until finally they gelled.
So kids like 6th grader Alex Hernandez can take as much time as they need to learn a concept.
My mom, she went to school in Mexico. Some things she can explain to me, but some she can't. So I take long to try to finish my homework.
How did you used to do in math?
Pretty bad, at a 3rd grade level math.
So Alex was way below grade level, and he's not alone in being way behind his peers. But the amazing thing is that by having access to online education, he was able to catch up to his classmates. Now, Alex is very, very lucky because in addition to having access to these resources, he also has an incredible teacher. And anyone who's ever had an amazing teacher knows that that is an unparalleled opportunity. Even Alex's teacher, who really is absolutely phenomenal, benefited from these online resources. And the reason is that she, like so many other teachers, always wanted to meet the needs of all of her students. That is the driving force for why she went into education. But when you have 25 or 35 or 45 students in a classroom, it's really hard to meet all of their needs. Even an incredible teacher can't be in 30 places at once. We haven't invented that technology yet. And so, by having Alex use free online education, by having him get to learn at his own pace, his teacher didn't have to distract herself completely from the needs of her other students. He could learn while she was doing other things, and she could see the work he was doing online and then more efficiently and effectively help him understand his misconceptions, spend time with him on the things he most needed help on. She said that she's a better teacher because he was able to start helping himself through online education. And as a result, Alex has now caught up to his classmates. And the really incredible thing is that it actually turns out Alex is really good at math. Once he got that foundation, he ended up being able to build on it and become a really good math student. But how many other students like Alex would have been in school and not been able to remediate, been forced to move ahead with their classmates for no one's fault, but just because of kind of the practicalities of the system? And he might have gotten a C or a D or an F and just said, you know what, I'm just not that good at math. Math's not really my thing. How many people have said that about math or about any discipline? How many people have written off their own potential talent in a discipline because they didn't have the time or they weren't allowed to work on what was relevant to them when they needed it? How much more talent could we cultivate? How much better off could we be if people were allowed to learn and study what was right for them at the right time? Mark is another example of the power of online education. He was always a poor student, didn't do well in school, but as an adult, really regretted not having become an engineer. That was his life's calling, and he always wanted to become an engineer. He found some free resources online, and he began to study in his spare time. He brushed up on all the basics he had never learned, and learned enough for free in his own time and his own pace that he was able to go back to school to become an engineer.
I just finished my first full year at Temple, first full year back in school. And keep in mind, I don't think I've ever gotten above a B+ in math classes, and I was really a straight C student growing up. And I just finished this year, first year back in college, I got a 4.0 GPA for the entire year.
So Mark's life is undoubtedly richer and better because he was able to brush up on the basics and get up to speed in order to go back to school to become an engineer. And I'm sure that many of us will benefit from the great engineering work that Mark does. So it's a great win for everyone. But what Mark represents, to me, is just the tip of the iceberg of what's possible with online education. Mark, as an adult, was able to change his life path by studying for free and in his own time. You know, if you're an adult and your skills are no longer valued by the market, or you weren't able to go to school in the first place, or you didn't do well in school, you don't often have many options. Maybe you can go to night school, but how are you going to pay for it, and who's going to watch your children? You know, it's not an easy thing to retool. if you miss your opportunities when you're a child, or if you don't have those opportunities, it's really hard to live up to your potential. But what's really exciting is that once education becomes accessible and free through online education, and more people can access it, you see amazing things happening, like what happened to Mark. For Mark, to become an engineer, he needed to go back to school and get a 4-year degree. But for a lot of skills, for a lot of jobs, that might not be necessary. And I think that we'll start to see micro-credentials emerging, where, we hear, of course, there's staggeringly high unemployment in many places, but at the same time, companies are having a shortage of workers who can do the jobs they need to do. And I think online education and micro-credentials can help bridge that gap so that people can retrain and develop talents that are valued in the market, and they can do it at 11:30 p.m. if that's when they have some time. They can do it at their own time, at their own pace, whenever they have a few spare moments. And as a result of this, people will be able to retool, to find work that's meaningful and that's valued, no matter what their background was. And what's really exciting about this is this will usher in an era of unparalleled social mobility in which your past does not have to dictate your future, in which the opportunities you had as a child do not have to determine what's possible for you going forward, in which no matter who or where you are, you will be able to shape your own life and be the author of your own destiny. I think that free online education can play a critical role in helping this happen. There will be many challenges ahead. This is certainly not the whole solution, and governments and corporations can really play a big fundamental role in making this happen. But I think that what we'll start to see is that because of free online education, we'll be able to significantly increase access to education, allow more people to get the education they need on their own time, at their own pace. And what we'll see is that that will significantly broaden the talent pool to the great benefit of both individuals and society. Thank you.